I actually have a lot of thoughts.
Okay.
Because I think Mythos is essentially a major successful PSYOP, and everyone was talking about it. And not because they care about it, because their CEOs are talking about it.
There's a transition happening from programming models to programming harnesses. What's driving that shift?
I think the next thing is that as an enterprise, I don't want to bind myself to Claude or to Codex, some kind of managed agent or some kind of like SDK that AWS brings out or that like OpenAI ships.
As sort of a hot topic online recently is CFOs questioning token spend.
One person who spent $40,000 in 1 month. What's going on? I don't have the answer. I'm very curious, right? Like, because maybe they did something awesome.
How close are we to software factories? Is that like the end goal in your opinion? Like, where are we headed?
I think software factories are going to be quite personalized. Our agent has access to your observability data, and it has also access to your source code.
Hey, my name's Allie Howe. Welcome to another episode of the Insecure Agents podcast. I'm your host. I'm super excited to be recording here today at Vercel's HQ in San Francisco. I'm here with Malte Ubl. He's the CTO of Vercel, leading Vercel's infrastructure and engineering here. He spent 11 years at Google previously, and I'm super excited to chat with him today about the new deepsec security harness that Vercel published. Malte, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Malte. I mean, you already said most of the things. It's been 4 years at Vercel. I love this place. And I've been personally vibe coding quite a bit, especially since Opus 4.5 came out in late December. Built stuff like Just Bash, which is like a sandbox for Bash execution that doesn't have a VM, Chat SDK, and now deepsec, which is the newest baby, which has, I think, been really helpful to lots of teams out in the open.
Amazing. I saw in a LinkedIn post you said that there's a transition happening from programming models to programming harnesses. What's driving that shift?
Yeah, I think you can really think of the abstractions going one level up, and I think this is actually a very emerging trend. So we will have, I think, more tooling in the future to help folks like manage this thing. But I think when you think about maybe 3 months ago still, you would have thought, okay, I as an enterprise, I don't want to bind myself to Anthropic or forever to OpenAI, right? So I want an abstraction that allows me to program this, and like, whether it's the response API or the legacy OpenAI API, it doesn't really matter. Like I'm always just programming against the AI SDK. And I think the next thing is that I don't really, as an enterprise, I don't want to bind myself to Claude or to Codex or to some kind of managed agent or some kind of like SDK that AWS brings out or that like OpenAI ships, right? I don't want to have this like vendor lock-in. So what if I could kind of go one level up and say, okay, can I program an agent that can run on all these harnesses? And I think that's kind of the next step. That's something we're working on. I think that the industry is kind of going that direction.
Mm. Yeah, that makes sense for sure. And is deepsec, which we mentioned, the new security harness that you created, a good example of that?
It is, because it does
Yeah.
support. It's really a coding agent wrapper in some ways, right? Like, and it supports both Codex and Claude, and then you can also use different models with them if that's your choice. Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah, for those that don't know what deepsec is, can you take a second to explain the purpose of it and how you started with it, why you wanted to create it in the first place?
Yeah. It was coming from well, first of all, it came from the insight that we had. Like, we actually built our own code review agent.
Mm.
And I actually personally pushed some code, and it
Yeah.
pointed out the security vulnerability that I was about to merge into our code base. And I was like, this is great, right? This is amazing. And it really found something quite subtle and like that had, I think, a high chance of escaping human review, right? So I was like very impressed. And so I told the team, well, I want to run this on my entire code base. And then, I don't know, they forgot about it. They didn't do it. And then a few months later, I started getting really worried about the security posture of the entire industry. It's like, I need to like up-level my whole security. And so I want to run a code review agent on all of my code. And I have millions of lines of code and multiple like large monorepositories, etc. And so as a security team, are you going to do this? And they're like, yeah, we're kind of figuring out whether we buy something, whether we do it ourselves. And then literally 1 hour later, this was 6:30 a.m. when they replied. At 7:30 a.m. I had like prototype working.
Amazing.
And so like really what deepsec is about is not to replace, it's not just another code review agent that you plug into your GitHub. It's really designed to say, okay, I have this like monster code base get everything reviewed in one swoop. And so that I know that I have like, at least with the current model baseline, I have like as secure of a code base as I can. And then I can run the code review on the incremental changes, right? But for the thousands and tens of thousands of changes from the last 5 years are like reviewed in the system. So that's kind of the main thing for deepsec, is review the entire code base, not just the incremental PR.
Okay, so to me, like that's a differentiator from like other security harnesses I've seen because they focus on the incremental change, but
Yeah,
like that first initial monster scan of the entire code base is actually really difficult from an engineering perspective because you have to manage so much context across so many different files.
right.
Like, how do you handle like compaction in that case? Like, do you have like an orchestrator agent? There's like little sub agents that like do parts and they all kind of like conglomerate together in the end. Like, what
Yeah,
does that look
yeah.
like?
Good question. So the rough architecture is that there is a fully deterministic scan phase, which essentially does very broad regex based matching for basically interesting places. So it doesn't say like, it doesn't want to aim to look for an XSS attack. It just says, okay, this is code that like is prone to have this problem, right? And this for essentially every other category of issue, right? And so it scans the code and finds all these places, and then it will. There's a little bit of simplification, but more or less start one agent per finding. That so there is no context management needed between these runs, because it literally just says, "Hi Codex" or "Hi Claude, here's something we found. Go figure it out." And then it does a essentially self-contained run just for that particular file that was highlighted.
Interesting. Okay. So are there sub agents that do that for every
Yeah,
single?
so it's using only sub agents. So
Mm,
every single like interesting part of the code base is analyzed by one sub agent.
interesting. Okay.
Yeah. And like there is a preface. So usually we recommend saying, okay, go do the scan, run deepsec once, but you can also like, it's really designed for a world where coding agents exist. So the first thing you do is actually that you tell uh, like Claude or Codex, we give you a prompt, basically say, okay, write down um, like or generate a file that gives all these sub agents kind of an overview of the repository, so that we don't every time have to like fully start from scratch, right? And to do like, not write a full threat model, but kind of highlight for this particular repository what's probably like an issue. That's also where you can add, like, if you get frequent false positives, you could edit it and kind of say, okay, these are the things that I maybe are accepted risk in my repository. And then also it chips with a skill that you can essentially instruct Claude or Codex to make custom matchers for this scanning phase. So it could be that you have some, unusual technology, or like, that there's something in your code base that's specifically sensitive. And so you can just make sure that the deterministic scan phase is definitely like pointing towards the things that you really care about. But then everything afterwards is always the same, where you just say deepsec, okay, now go process all this code.
Hmm. That makes sense. Yeah, I feel like being able to give custom context about like the security posture maybe of like that repo like at large or other contexts is a really like helpful component or reason to maybe like go build your own security harness from scratch versus like buy some tool that's on the market. How long did it take you to, after you said, I know it took you like an hour to get their initial prototype working, but how long after that did it take to get something that maybe like your entire team could be using? It?
Yeah, yeah. So it's definitely a case of the first 80%, second 80%. But really, the prototype was just me trying to answer the following question:
Mm.
are the models actually going to do it? Because they might refuse, right?
Oh,
Because
yes.
there's all this FUD in the industry where there's like GPT 5.4 cyber, right? And Claude does the same thing, which are essentially models that are like tuned to not refuse certain tasks, right? But turns out, for this particular task, for the prompts that DeepSec is giving, the refusal rate is not zero, but it's like very close to zero. And it's also kind of like, basically, if it's refuses, you could just try again. And because refusal rate is under 1%, like, in the retry, it's going to do it. So that's an important insight, right? Like, so for this type of task, the run of the mill standard, like OpenAI and Anthropic models are going to actually do it, right? Are going to not think that you're gonna want to try hack the company and they shouldn't do their job, right? So that was the first thing. And so I kind of verified, okay, it does find things and it actually does the job. It doesn't refuse, right? And then the second part, because again, my goal was to run this on the whole code base, right?
Mhm.
I've quickly found out that it would take like days to do it. Maybe days isn't even that long, but like I was too impatient. So I built out the infrastructure, which is part of deepsec, where you can um essentially fan out all these sub agents across many Vercel sandboxes.
Mhm.
I've actually been running deepsec on usually about 1,000 cores. So you have 1,000 agents at the same time looking at like, or like, yeah, 1,000 concurrent sub agent kind of working on something. With that, still like running deepsec against like some of our large vulnerability repos takes like 30 minutes.
Mhm. Yeah, another thing I was wondering about too that I've seen as sort of a hot topic online recently is CFOs questioning token spend. I think something like DeepSec is a really great example of very wise token spend.
Yeah.
How expensive is it to run DeepSec?
Yeah, I mean, I feel incredibly good about the token spend, right?
Yeah.
Like, 'cause it finds real issues,
Hmm.
and they're the best finds where you go fix them. And if you look through what it finds, it's sometimes it might be quite critical, but you kind of look at it and it's like, okay, nobody could ever find this from the outside, right? Doesn't mean that people don't have source code access, but based on your threat model, could be more or less critical. But then really all the time you see stuff, okay, this is stuff that I would have eventually gotten a HackerOne report about,
Yes.
right? And so I think DeepSec like easily pays for itself if you have a like somewhat active HackerOne program. So from that point of view, I would just not worry about costs. But yeah, to very concretely answer the cost, it really depends on the size of your code base, right? Because it's essentially proportional to the size of your code base, how much it costs. So it's anywhere between like $5 and I mean, literally, I think I spent like $50,000
Mhm.
on scanning for our code bases. But I ran them multiple times, and I was actually developing on it. And it's like, okay, like I actually just made it much better. I kind of to start from scratch, right? So, but again, like it's completely proportional to the amount of code that you have. But again, like I think it's money very well spent.
Yeah, I think the business outcome there is very like well quantitatively defined and justifiable for sure. And I was talking to David Kramer from Century the other
Mm,
day, who built Warden, which seems like kind of similar. And he was saying that he spent around like $1,000 on like token spend for something similar like this, and they found like 60 plus vulnerabilities, which they would have paid bug bounties for. And when
right.
you take the cost of that compared to the token spend, it's definitely money like well invested. But for other areas of the business that might not be as like well concrete in terms of here's the benefit or like the justifiable reason like why we spent this much on tokens, like how do you justify the work there? Are you thinking about token spend at all? Or is this like all hype? Like CFOs aren't questioning token spend yet?
We're definitely looking at it, and we want to make sure it's kind of proportional to the value we're getting. What we are definitely seeing is that we see outliers,
Mm.
right? Where like, I mean, I was like just literally looking at a chart, and it was like one person who spent $40,000 in 1 month, which is like very substantially above the median or even the like let's call it P95 that we're seeing, right?
Yes.
And so I think then it's really interesting because say like, hey, you actually personally costs some good chunk of our entire spend. What's going on? I mean, actually, I don't have the answer. I'm very curious, right? Like, because maybe they did something awesome. Maybe they
Yeah.
ran DeepSec a
Yeah.
lot, but I generally don't know, and I'm very curious. So my main advice is definitely worth looking at spend on a per person basis because often the average kind of doesn't tell a very good story about like what actually causes the total amount.
That makes sense. It's an easy, like good place to start for sure.
Yeah.
And then you mentioned Codex and Claude for DeepSec. Are those the main models that power it?
Yeah, so they're the harnesses that
Mhm.
are being run as sub agents.
Okay.
So Codex and Claude are the sub agent that DeepSec uses to do the actual work. And so like they're configured with the like best models at the highest setting,
Mm.
but you can override it, right?
Okay.
But like again. Why would you do that, right? Because it's such a high kind of ROI operation, that going and basically starting with the best seems to be kind of um, the most sensible thing to do. But maybe you'll have some ongoing running, and you try using Sonnet, or maybe not extra high for the um for the thinking setting. That's obviously an option.
Yes. I know a lot of people have been concerned about Anthropic's Mythos that's supposed to be like the most amazing at finding like vulnerabilities and is kind of frightening to a lot of people. And it is finding vulnerabilities for sure. There's reports about that. But a lot of people don't have access to Mythos yet. And it certainly seems like plenty of people are finding lots of vulnerabilities using the highest available models like from
Yeah.
Anthropic or like OpenAI as well. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that around
No,
like,
I actually have a lot of thoughts,
okay.
because I think Mythos is essentially kind of a major successful psyop,
Yes. Okay.
right?
Okay. Yes.
But because, like, I mean, I was actually at the
Mhm.
AWS Customer Advisory Board last week, and everyone was talking about it, and not because they care about it, because their CEOs are talking about it. So, like, this is now a CEO topic,
Mhm.
right? And
Mhm.
people are like, what's going on? What's our Mythos strategy,
Mhm.
right? And in a way, it paralyzes people, because you could run current generation models and it would find all this stuff, and that's also like the most likely to be exploited stuff, because it's easier to find. And so, like, there's absolutely nothing that should, like, inhibit anyone from using current generation models
Mhm.
today, right? And I think another thing, I already mentioned the, like, dash cyber models, right? So I think one thing I understand is the way deepsec works is it's essentially it is not a static analysis tool in the traditional sense, because it's entirely AI based, right? But it doesn't run the code.
Mm.
Like, the agent is instructed not to run the code, and so it can only reason through the code and say, like, essentially, I think there's a vulnerability here, but it is not instructed to verify, to try to exploit it, right? And obviously that can also be sometimes really difficult, because applications aren't so easy to actually run and stuff. But like it's essentially, but that's essentially out of scope, right? And so if you want to build a harness that does active exploitation, you need a dash cyber model,
Mm.
right? So, like, then you'll start getting refuels. But for the task of, okay, I have my source code because it's mine, and dear model, can you figure out what's going on? That just works today with the models you can get off the shelf. And I really don't think um, people should hold back. And in particular, GPT 5.5 is excellent. It's very good. It's much better uh, than Claude 4.7. A new version came out today, though,
Okay.
4.8. So we have to re-eval.
Yes.
Um, so we'll see who the latest leader is, but GPT 5.5 is excellent and very, very impressive. It finds some stuff where, like, you can just kind of say, like, good job. Like, it's impressive.
Amazing. And then how does the AI gateway that Vercel made help you become like agnostic to like ditch model or use both internally? Like what does the gateway provide?
Yeah, I think the main reason that the gateway is helpful is, even in if you use it on a single machine,
Mhm.
right? It's really like, if you, let's say you have a Cloud Code Max plan, $200 a month, right, which is very common,
Mhm.
you'll run into rate limits, because DeepSec is just doing so much work in a short amount of time, right? And so you need to get like an AI API key with higher quota. And it's actually, if you go to OpenAI today and you don't have one already, they won't give you one so easily. I mean, they give you an API key, but it's going to be, because they're afraid of fraud and stuff. It's going to be quite limited in how much money you can actually give them, until you did, and they kind of go can upgrade you over time. And because that's the case, like, that's one of the features of Vercel's AI Gateway. So that because we really care about startups that want to, like, be successful, we give you higher default limits, and so that's one thing. The other thing is that there's a feature to run on multiple sandboxes at the same time. And so that obviously then further increases the amount of quota you need from the model provider. And again, the AI gateway helps not get into quota issues, as you kind of fanning out the work.
That makes sense. I saw in some of the advice within the deepsec repo about when you should be using sandboxes, and maybe like not when they're less important, but it said if you're running like codex on like a host, make sure for sure to use the Vercel sandboxes and like the micro VMs that like come with it. I was really interested to learn more about like your decision to use like micro VMs for sandboxes, because I've had this conversation about sandboxes before with other guests that I brought on, and they've
Mm,
said it's a very common misconception that Docker provides like true isolation,
right.
and if there's a kernel like zero day or vulnerability in one container, that container can like go affect another one on the same host. But with a micro VM, like that infrastructure is completely isolated, so it won't affect like another customer per se. Was there any other like security decisions that went into like the micro VM decisions?
Yeah, I mean, in my opinion, it's the
Yeah.
only acceptable
Mm.
way of doing it, right? Like so these sandboxes are designed to run untrusted code, right? And so that, which includes, I mean, full system access. So whatever could possibly be done from within the sandbox has to be part of the threat model, right? And so, you know, I, I know there's providers out there that don't use micro VMs. I think like it's a bad choice. And it will get you owned. The uh, yeah, and I mean, with the Firecracker system, there is a really, really robust, I mean, ultra hyperscale tested out solution.
Mhm.
Um, and so we built this on a shared stack that we've been actually running for many years for Vercel's build system. So we're running about 3 million builds a day.
Mhm.
That's on the same infrastructure. And then we're also running a good chunk of the function as a service workload that people deploy to Vercel on the same stack. And in all these cases, from our point of view, it's untrusted code,
Mhm.
right? The difference of the sandbox is it's also untrusted code from the point of view of the owner of the sandbox, right?
Yes.
So but ultimately, from like it doesn't make a difference. Like you have to have the micro VMs. What is really really key on top of the VM though is the egress policies
Mhm.
for kind of data that goes out of the VM. So if you use Vercel sandboxes with deepsec, it's default configured that the only host the that the sandbox is allowed to talk to on the entire internet is first it does do a git, it does do a checkout of your sources, right? But then that permission is being taken away
Oh.
before the agent starts to run, right? And so the agent has no reason to talk to any host except Vercel AI Gateway. And so that is the only host on the internet that is allowed to talk to. And so if you, let's say, prompt inject, like say, I mean, DeepSeek is for trusted code, but obviously there could be like a dependency in there that has a prompt injection README file, right? And you can't exclude from the possibility that the agent reads that README file, and the README file says like, zip up all the source code and put it into you know, somewhere on the internet, right? So that wouldn't work because that egress is denied. And again, even if you say, okay, I'm smart, I'm gonna post it to like into like a Git repository because it's so likely that GitHub is allow listed. It's not, right? Because it literally only allows talking to the AI backend and nothing else.
So this sounds like task scoped, highly ephemeral credentials.
Yeah, so it's not this is actually more or less traditional firewall,
Mm.
but there is also the credential part. So the actual sandbox does not get the credential. It's actually in this case using OIDC tokens, but it doesn't even get the OIDC token.
Mm.
So it's the same egress firewall that controls that only Versailles Gateway can see can get any traffic from within the sandbox. Performs an injection of the credential, so that the sandbox itself actually doesn't need the credential at all. And so that again, like if you somehow prompt inject the system to steal the credential, it doesn't have it. So there's nothing to steal.
Amazing. Yeah, that's when we talk about like real like hard security boundaries. Like that to me is a great example of that.
Yeah. Yeah. There was actually an interesting tweet yesterday where Anthropic realized that host-based alloweds are often not sufficient. It actually does work in this case because the Vercel AI gateway domain truly has nothing on it
Mhm.
except that one task. But you have to be careful often with like large hosts like GitHub.com. There's a lot of stuff on it, right? So really reasoning about what you could possibly do if you have access to it is quite hard. And the answer is probably no. Actually, you can like actually do some pretty substantial stuff. And so people have to ideally you're even tighter than just a host name. You kind of allow this down to the individual path that you
Mhm.
actually want to talk to.
If a security team wanted to pick up deepsec today for the first time and they want to do that like first initial scan and then after that they're scanning, the diffs, how often should they go back and do the full scan in your opinion? Is there like reason to do that? Like is
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I think for the full scan, I would do it like I think the conservative thing to do is to do it every time there's a new model release
Mm,
or new harness release that where like you have good reason to believe that it's better at this than before, right? So, um, and that since today we have Cloud 4.8 shipping, maybe it's not worth it, because it's like in point release. But maybe if you read somewhere like it's so much better at these tasks, it's worth doing. Um, but certainly when like let's say Mythos actually does ship, right? Why like you should probably do another scan with DeepSec and Mythos, right? But yeah, that's kind of the way I would go about it. Basically, every time you have a reason to believe that
mm,
there's now a better model that would find stuff that the previous model wouldn't have found, um, it's worth running again. There could be other policies. I think we like these are the models are not deterministic, so there's definitely it doesn't hurt to run it twice, even in short order, right? Like it's
yeah.
there's direct support for this because it's so like they miss things, and so you can just run them again. Or it's also worth doing like trying both Claude and Codex, right? Again, if you're not cost sensitive, there's
Mhm.
really very little reason not to just do both.
Yes, that makes sense. Yeah, and I was also wondering too if you're doing that scan across like all of these different like code bases and you get all this information. Have you ever thought about creating a higher level security harness for like the security program in general, where it's okay, we're gonna take all the information, maybe it's a summarized like a file about like this repo and all the risks, but also like pull information and context from other security tools or other like context across the organization, and then distill some sort of like information or like hidden risks about like the entire like organization. Like I feel like that might be something, I've talked to other people, like, that are running internal, like, security programs, and they're thinking, like, "Yes, it's super interesting to, like, get all of this information from, like, these tools now, but how do I conglomerate this information?" And sort
Right.
of like a security, like, context graph, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, we've definitely considered all these things. We're still also kind of working on the workflow of getting the tickets fixed as fast as possible, right? Like, so DeepSec doesn't do itself make a fix,
Mhm.
but obviously it could, and certainly you could have kind of software factory that goes and picks up the work and then does many of the fixes. Often they're very simple, right? Um, and yeah, no, I think we're like there's definitely a lot of work to do to now that we have so much information to actually make it accessible to folks and really useful.
Yes. Amazing. Yeah, I saw on your Twitter profile, it says, self-driving infrastructure.
Yeah.
I feel like, yes, this is definitely a great, like, step in that direction with DeepSec and then, having something to go and, like, implement the fixes that it finds. How close are we to software factories? Is that, like, the end goal in your opinion? Like, where are we headed?
I think software factories are going to be quite personalized. So it's definitely interesting that there aren't really products on the market yet. But I think what we're seeing is a big trend is that larger companies are building their own software factory. That's very much like it's aware of how they want to like qualify releases, how they ship software. Like all these workflows are automated, and like there is a coding agent kind of as part of that workflow. And so we're working on like a lot of the building blocks so people can ship these things themselves. And certainly from a like kind of self-driving infrastructure point of view, um, we are like heavily invested in Vercel's own agent and skills. Like we want people to be able to run these themselves, but then on the Vercel side, you have a more proactive version of it, right? The
Mhm.
self-driving part, where like, for example, we might say, okay, there is actually a new, very interesting like model out. Would you want us to run DeepSec for you using the new model, right? Or maybe you can pre-approve it and you say, okay, here's the conditions under which I think that's a good idea. Similarly, we as the operator of your software, we have obviously access to the production data. And that's kind of the opposite of deepsec, which is like essentially full only operating on the source code.
Mhm.
So our agent has access to like your log files, your observability data, and it has also access to your source code, right?
Mhm.
And so there's this definitely interesting, like you can envision that the agent says, okay, well we saw this like traffic bump from like this VPN IP addresses or private proxies, right? And then the agent can go, okay, what did they do? What is the source code that's being accessed? And is there anything interesting to find in kind of between these three things? And that's the type of stuff that we're really working on and kind of iterating every day.
Amazing. Yeah, super looking forward to that. That makes sense for sure. And it's really interesting to me too, like the feedback loop between security and engineering teams is now very short because it's so easy to just go and implement these fixes.
Yeah.
So yeah, super excited about the future. Is there anything else like coming up for Vercel that you'd like to mention? Anything else we should keep an eye on?
Yeah, I mean, for this audience, I think people should try DeepSec. It's
Mhm.
like, there's why wouldn't you, right? And you'll feel better about it. Like I made it for myself because I didn't want to live in a world where it's not around, right? So that's definitely, I think, like, again, like just give it a try. But there's almost no downside. I mean, we've been seeing like a world where like their agents are introducing kind of new threats into the world, right? And so I think I talked a little bit about our sandbox program. I think that's relevant for many folks. Um, we have a lot of work coming out. That we'll announce at our conference in London in a few weeks around how to manage agent like permissions, connectivity to different systems, not have as many static credentials,
Mhm.
right? We overall kind of want to make our ecosystem be a place where there's zero static credentials. We've ironically call it the death of long-lived credentials. They have to go away. They like in the world of agents, you might have been previously able to kind of manage them in some way, right? But as soon as you have agents kind of in that world, um, there's just no way to keep that secure. And so like we're definitely working on the same kind of secret injection that I already mentioned to have that on all our compute products, right? So that there's definitely a world where no code ever actually has to see a credential.
Mm.
But obviously then they can still be abused, even if they can't be stolen. So there's lots of other work to do to get people from static credentials to OAuth to OIDC, et cetera, right? It's a journey, but we're kind of excited to go on that journey.
Amazing. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how the industry progresses at large with this. So yeah, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. I
This is
really
fun.
appreciate it.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.